Hey everyone, this is Derrick Broze with the Conscious Resistance Network, and today we're going to continue our conversation with activists, individuals who are out there in the real world. Yes, remember, there is a place beyond your computer screen, beyond your phone screens, a place that we need to remember to visit, to go out there and talk to people in the real human living space, spreading our ideas, specifically spreading the ideas of voluntarism, helping people understand why government is slavery, and then beyond that, helping people realize that there are actual practical solutions that we can live and that we can incorporate in our lives. And I love speaking to people who understand this and who have as much passion for this as I do. And I think our guest today really embodies that and understands that. So would love for you guys to check out his work and check out all the things we go over. Please welcome to the show, Cory Endrulat. How you doing, brother? First time that we're having you on my program. You've had me on yours before. How are you doing?
Yeah, thank you so much, Derek. I've always appreciated the work you've done for so many years. It's so crucial that people see new perspectives and especially that better world that is possible, because I don't have to tell your audience a lot of the problems. A lot of them know the problem that is happening in the world, but the solution is equally just as important looking at and taking that into our own hands and with our own neighbors and our own communities and finding out how to go about doing that, how to talk with people. These are the solutions that I engage with on a day-to-day basis. And I know that you have done this more than a lot of other people in the movement, which is why I give you credit. Not a lot of independent media is necessarily in it for the action and for the solutions if they're looking for the clickbait and always going for the new articles and what rises to the top. But we're showing by example. Somebody doesn't have to agree with us about the problems in the world, but they can look at the solutions and they can see, hey, that's better than what we have now. And that's going to create a better world, the one that is based on voluntary interaction, on the non-aggression principle, on ideas so basic of morality and the golden rule. Who could disagree with it, right? So
Absolutely.
it seems like we have this ancient wisdom that has been passed down for generation to generation, and it's just about applying that. And as we seem to evolve, we ended slavery in the 1800s. We realize, wait, there's other forms of slavery. A lot of my works talks about the abolitionists from the 19th century. And so I talk about people like Josiah Warren, which I know you studied. Very few people have also studied them, but Lysander Spooner, we're not taught about these individuals in the school, right? There's even people farther back like Etienne de la Boétie from France.
Yeah.
And you can go even farther back, and I talk about the ancient Chinese, the Taoist philosophy with Lao Tzu and Zhuangzi, and these individuals are very, remarkable. These ideas are growing exponentially every single year. People realizing, wait,
Absolutely.
what's going on? Their words apply so well today. Even people are extracting from the Bible and tons of religious texts because it's a living word, and people are seeing that there's a higher authority than man. We need to challenge these systems that we have been trained or conditioned into, because the schooling system is based on the Prussian model of schooling. People like John Taylor Gatto came out of that schooling system. David Rodriguez, a friend of mine as well, sharing his works. It's all coming together. We're realizing the schooling system, the food system, the media system, it's all not working. So we need to create these systems ourselves and show by example the better world that is possible. So thank you,
Absolutely.
Derek. I mean, I don't like to talk too much about myself, but I talk about the abolitionists mainly. That's my focus. I have
Yeah.
a book that I'm doing a re-edition of my slavery book. And so I have hundreds of different abolitionists.
Well, let's talk more about that for maybe for people who aren't familiar with your work, Cory. Let's get into some of that because I know today we're going to focus more on some of that practical
Right.
what you're doing in Florida, and I know people will be really excited about. But for those who maybe haven't come across your work, let's go ahead and pop on your website here. Tell us about like what's your story. How did you come across this information originally? Because I know you're a very bright dude and you are meticulous with your research, and I appreciate that and I recognize that in you. What was your journey to finding yourself going down these rabbit holes?
Well, when I was 13, I used the internet to my advantage. Growing up into the age of technology, luckily not too early, because nowadays kids can just be handed an iPad the minute they're born into this world. But that was around 2008 for me when the iPhone and all that was announced. And so I was 8 years old. I was born in 2000. And so when I was 13, I researched ingredients and nutrition, and that got me questioning why we aren't taught about what's in our food. I just saw blatantly. You see tons of ingredients, and you're like, "What is this?" And then you research, and you're like, "Wait, this causes cancer." And then the media is like 15 years late to that picture. Like now they're saying sodium nitrate causes cancer. People have known that for like 30 plus years. And now they're finally replacing that in a lot of the meats, for example. And you see this with a lot of different things. It's like, how behind are the mainstream and how ahead is the independent? Constantly in my research, I was running into websites like Natural News and Food Babe, and then I would eventually run into websites like yours, The Conscious Resistance. And that allowed me to open up into different channels of questioning things, right? And so I always looked at many different sources, and just following that path, then I changed my whole family's diet. At first, yeah, they had resistance. They're like, what is this? And they were challenging me, right? But because I was there with them and I was always very close with my family, showing by example, saying, hey, what if we just try this food? What if we try this? What if we try that? Over time, yeah, now they could speak for me. I can just be silent, and it's like wow, my mom will go on a rant about how the world is and the food supply and all this. Like, she knows it better than me now. And so it's just this process of Socratic questioning, showing by example. And Larkin Rose talks about that in his Candles in the Dark seminar, how to talk to people, how to help them, because we get so eager, like, man, we know all this stuff is wrong in the world. We got to tell everybody, go on the rooftops and yell at them. It's not necessarily the solution, right? So I just had that journey of using the tools at my fingertips. And over time, it led me to politics. Inevitably, in 2016, I was super pro-Trump, statist, as you may say. And then I realized it's a game. The left versus right game is not going to help us. I had every single Republican talking point. My dad worked for Trump. I had the water bottles. I had the shirt. I was telling people to go to the polls. I knew everything to defend this guy. And I was like, the left is evil. And a lot of people are in that position now. That's not to say I have a moral high ground. It's to say that I'm realizing voluntarism and these ideas I was not taught, that I wasn't seeing. Like, for my whole life, I've had this message: nature is the answer. I'm a very nature-seeking person. I was raised in the mountains in Northeast Pennsylvania. But see, over time, I did not apply that to politics. I didn't apply that to government. I made a moral exception. And that's what a lot of people are doing now. They agree that violence is wrong, but in the case of government and law, they allow it and legitimize it every day. They just don't know how. And so when I started asking myself those moral questions, I was like, wait, how come we aren't asked why aren't we asking ourselves these questions? Like, no politician's going to go on stage and talk about morality and philosophy and psychology, because if they did, it wouldn't benefit their campaign. So I ran into the works of Dr. Carl Jung, and I did a whole series of that on the Liberator.us, where we're getting deep into the psychology. I found Mark Passio and his work on natural law, and you can tell it's very much about the psychology of things. So in 2019, I started to produce content about health mainly. And then I got into talking about natural law and natural rights through the Mark Passio community. He invited me to the One Great Work Network. Since he was in Pennsylvania, it wasn't too difficult to actually meet up and go to some of his events. So that was quite awesome. Mark Passio was kind of like the step in the door to the independent media, because I was doing it on my own for a couple of years and I wasn't really in touch with anybody. So now it's like I'm talking to Mike Adams, I'm talking to you. It's like amazing, because I never would have expected that. But it's simply because I took the steps to take control of my life in my own thinking.
Yeah, and I think for one, I want to commend you, brother. I mean, I didn't realize that you were born in 2000. You're not the youngest person in the movement, but on the younger side. I'm only 39 myself, so I consider myself still young as well. We've got elders like G. Edward Griffin and others who've been doing this for so freaking long, and so it's cool to see that the movement will continue on and the ideas will continue on, just as they have from the time of Lysander Spooner and Benjamin Tucker and all those folks before him. And you mentioned two people there. I was going to ask, but I think you kind of already answered, in terms of some of your major influences, Larkin Rose, Mark Passio, and other people. I think that's really great. And hopefully everybody in our audience is familiar with them. If not, you can go to theconsciousresistance.com and search both their names and see interviews I've done with both those gentlemen going back almost a decade now. And let's show your site again. Tell us a bit more about, so what kind of content do you host? What sort of stuff do you put on all your platforms?
Everything I create is for everybody. So you won't see my name or my content on a lot of my works because I create it so everybody can replicate it and use it for their benefit. That's why I wanted to talk with you about a lot of different projects and ideas that a lot of people can partake in. You'll see there's a bunch of buttons there each with different functions. One is a learn page, one is an action page, very simple. And then all of the other buttons are different things you can do. There's even a quiz that I created with 95 questions, or a shorter version with only about 15, and an AI that we even created that you can talk to and ask questions, and it will challenge you about your own statism in case you do believe in the political process and think that's a means for freedom. And so we have it all really set up there. And I do commend you, because you guys were kind of the forerunners to a lot of this knowledge. And the abolitionists, I would consider them the first voluntarists, the first anarchists in history. And yeah, they were fighting slavery, chattel slavery, but they were talking about a lot more. And in my works, I prove that. They were not just talking about chattel slavery. Lysander Spooner specifically calls it political slavery. There was also economic slavery that happened after the Civil War. You know, the government paid off slave owners. There was a lot of different things that happened that I can get into, but there's also figures like Charles Lane, and he talked about a voluntary government, and his colleagues were like, is that really government? And then, you know, you had people like Jeremiah Hacker, who was reforming the prison system, who was building schools for people. And so they're doing a lot of the things that I'm showing people can do now. And through this website, people can network just like they do with like Freedom Cells. I have a coordinator system, and I link to Freedom Cells because I think, you know, that website is unique. I haven't really seen other people do that type of structure. So that's great. I do think it needs to maybe have a central message, or people to have an intent, a passion going into it, right? Because we can tell people to do something, but if they don't have that internal passion or drive to do it, it's not going to go anywhere. So you create a blueprint, and now it's up to other people to take that blueprint and choose what to do with it. And so I created this blueprint. It's up to people what they want to do with it, but I have a bunch of different strategies on there, all non-political, to help us achieve freedom. Everything from growing food to, you know, how to talk to your neighbors, as I mentioned that one before, to even non-political campaigns, such as using signs that are universal and timeless, as opposed to signs that are just about people and events and things that are sort of temporary, rather ideas that open the mind and get people questioning. And you don't expect to change the whole world. You don't expect to reach everybody. You expect perhaps to reach the people who are ready for that information, and to have it there as an option for when things do go down, they will be desperate and looking for different options. And at least you will be another option, because you don't want the dependent system of the government and their CBDCs and whatever else they're planning to be the only option for people when things go down. And so it's important that we just show by example and just be there for people, not impose upon them, because that would be counterintuitive to what we say we want, which is a voluntary world and people to make up their own mind. Right. So we have to approach this with intelligence. And I'm willing to help anybody out there if they want to learn how to create content, how to get started. That website is a newspaper I run every single week. It's a newsletter as well. People can print it, and people can send me their article. I'll turn it into a video for them with a green screen production and everything. And I do all my work for free. If you notice, there's no donation, anything on any of my works. And it's not that I'm against it. Just personally, I don't want to do it. My work has always been done out of my passion, of my heart. Again, since I was like 18 or 19, and I want to keep it that way. I don't want to produce just because I need to produce just for money. Then I wouldn't be really producing authentically. So to me, if I want to take a break for several months, I want to do that. Now, are there going to be times where I might need financial help regarding certain projects? I'll be very open and transparent the whole way if I do that. For instance, this land project I'm doing in Florida, it's going to cost millions of dollars. I don't know if I should set up a GoFundMe for this, give, send, go, more likely. But I don't know if that's what I'm going to do. Right now, I'm talking to a lot of people who are potential investors, right? So I'm just seeing my options here and seeing what could be happen. But it's going to happen in a couple of years. Like, I'm going to have a site, I know, like a real place on land nearby, and it's going to be near the Tampa area, where we can grow food and demonstrate to the world this is what freedom looks like.
Yeah, before we jump into that, yeah. I want to ask a couple more questions. For one, you made a point a moment ago that I think is you talked about the importance of talking to neighbors. Years ago here in Houston, the activist group that I was involved in, we had an activist house that 2 or 3 of us lived in, and we had meetings, and it was basically like our headquarters, you know. And so we picked up this like display case that used to be at a library where you could put books, and we had all of our different flyers and zines promoting many of the ideas you're talking about here. And one of my favorite flyers said, talk to neighbors, not to cops. And it was just like about the importance of community and about connecting with each other. And just, again, I do think in our very often fractured world, even though we're connected through the internet, people, a lot of people feel alone. There's a loneliness epidemic. People feel very fractured. And so we're connecting online, but we're not necessarily connecting in person. And there's, especially if you're in bigger cities, there's this kind of feeling that we don't really know our neighbors, and how many people even talk to their neighbors on a regular basis. Instead, it's kind of like peering at the neighbors through the window and like, what are they up to? And there's not this sort of camaraderie that I believe used to exist and definitely existed in the tribal setting in the past. And even in the United States, many people, I would say the older generations, they might have fond memories of neighbors coming over and welcoming you to the neighborhood and things like that. These are things that don't really exist too much anymore in most places, most modern places. But I just really can't emphasize the importance of that. Not only just getting out beyond the computer screen and talking to people about the ideas you care about, voluntarism, ending slavery, etc., but just in general, like connecting on a human level with the people closest to you. Because, and I think it's also strategic because, if you think about it, we can build movements, and we're working on building a worldwide international movement through the Freedom Cell Network and the Greater Reset and stuff, and we're seeing success, and I love that, and I'm grateful for that. Grateful to know that there's people just like you and I in Africa or in India and other places doing the same thing we're doing for their communities. But it does me no good if all of my friends are on the internet on the other side of the world whenever shit goes down, right? So if we're living in a neighborhood and everybody around you has been indoctrinated to think that you're the crazy person or that people like us are the problem, that's not a very good strategic position to be in. So not only is it, I think, just overall a positive net benefit spiritually, emotionally, to get connected to your neighbors and the people closest to you, but in terms of strategy and long term, you definitely want to have some sense of camaraderie or connection to the people near you. At the very least, have your neighbors not think you're the nut job that they keep hearing about on the TV that's this right-wing extremist or whatever, right? So there's many reasons to be connected to our neighbors, and I just wanted to emphasize that point. And I also wanted to take a moment before we get into all the awesome things you're working on in Florida, which I think is great because my audience will be familiar. I bought land in Mexico last year. I'm currently in Texas right now, but my plan is pretty much to go back to Mexico at the end of this month and spend the rest of the year. I'm trying to build my house on the land by the end of this year and really move that project forward. And we see more and more people taking this kind of exit and build idea, exiting from the slavery systems and from the big cities and building on our own properties and our own land so that we can have some of these we can actually live as an example instead of just talking in theory and hypotheticals and stuff like that. But I want to take a moment to talk about the summit that you included me, and I'm so grateful you included me. Could you share a little bit about that? Because I know you produced just an amazing amount of content between so many different thinkers and philosophers and doers. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so the focus was the End of Slavery Summit, insinuating that we need to end slavery, and slavery has not been ended. And going over the nature of slavery will help you understand it is a philosophical, moral scenario, and it can't just be abolished by writing it on a piece of paper and saying, "Oh, I hereby declare slavery is abolished," and the mentality and the subservience and all that physical bondage that's just gone away after thousands of years. It doesn't work like that. That mental subservience still remains, as Larkin Rose would say. And he makes a lot of connections to this very much directly. His latest movie, The Jones Plantation, directly goes into the topic of slavery. A lot of people think, oh, it's a movie about slavery, but it's much more than that. It makes people question their own belief system, which is key to this, because mental slavery, as Martin Luther King said, as Bob Marley said, as Gandhi and many others have said, is the root to all slavery. Okay, it starts in the mind. And even Mark Passio says it's the principle of mentalism, the plane of causation, that which creates the effects for the physical world that we live in. So if you change the hearts and minds of people, you can change the reality, which is why the abolitionists coined a term for this. They called it moral suasion. And a lot of them actually did not participate in voting and the political process for that reason, because they said this is where the real change takes place. And people like Patrick Smith, Disenthrall, would go on the stage and be the not governor, just to say, hey, don't vote. Don't vote for me. Hey, you should not go into this political process. Let's be the change ourselves. And so I see that you did similar efforts too, and people are realizing it's a clown show. It's a show. It's a puppet game. And so I invite a lot of different speakers from all sorts of different backgrounds. People who are former law enforcement, people who like David Icke, from a spiritual background, people from the schooling community like Dana Martin, right? So a lot of different speakers, and I was amazed. This event did really well. It had a lot more people on the event than even my own channels. Um, and I was glad to see it succeed so well. We have a second event coming after this called the Liberator 2 Showcase that anybody who's listening can get involved with. And it might be an annual event as well. So you can be sure to send me your 1 minute clip. I made that in a format so that way anybody can get involved. They don't have to, do an interview, and they can just record it with any device they have. A 1 minute clip. I'll even do the editing for them. So I made a new format for that because especially nowadays, people like Instagram and TikTok and these very short form media. So it kind of would get us in the habit of being trained into the latest form of media production. But as you can see, there's a lot of people from different backgrounds in the summit, and everybody's talking about slavery one way or another, whether they're talking about freedom or spirituality, because that's what it is. If you have different opinions, you have a worldview that's unique of your own, different senses of different solutions, that defies the government, because the government says this is the solution that everybody must abide to. This is the person who must produce the law that tells everybody how to live their own lives. So just by having a diverse group of people who have different opinions and different views, I think that already is telling. And the abolitionist, I do see as the best model for action. I went into this Liberator 2 project as a collaboration with William Douglas. I found his work online. He had the website, thelaterdayliberator.com. Through my research, I found him and I reached out to him. I'm like, wait, you read the same abolitionist as me and you came to the same conclusion. He was a voluntarist and he didn't know anything about me. He didn't know anything about the movement, Larkin Rose, none of us. And he just read the abolitionist text and he was writing about this, and he had his own thing called the Later Day Liberator. And so I reached out to him because his writings were powerful and amazing. And now, he's co-authoring a book with me, redoing my slavery book. So we find so much value looking back at that time period. Again, the foundations to all voluntarism, people who built towns for the Underground Railroad. Charles Lane created Fruitlands, Josiah Warren, Modern Times, these towns that have even been purported to have no crime within their 15-year history. I mean, it's on the record, it's mainstream. And there's plenty of demonstrations you can see from that time period that helped slaves run away from the law. And that was considered illegal, but they did it because it was moral. They helped the slaves go leave, the United States up into Canada, stay at these towns. These towns, some of them had their own economic system. Some of them was like a getaway for people away from the government systems. I mean, it's just like remarkable because when you look
It's
at
a beautiful history.
yeah, when you look at Jim Gale and what he's doing in Florida, is he not doing the same thing in a sense, which is building and exiting, as you're saying? Like saying here we can have off-grid Airbnbs and we can have all these events and we can grow food and we can have abundance and now we can barter with others. Every person who walks through that food forest, their mind opens. And that's what I've experienced. Like if you want a door to say this is the better solution, rather than telling someone for hours on end, as Larkin Rose said, there's like nobody we've ever met who's ever said, oh, somebody lectured to me for like 5 hours and then they changed my mind. No, it doesn't work like that. There's got to be some sort of aha moment in their life, whether it's 9/11 or the 2008 banking crash or COVID or whatever it is, that gets people to be like, okay, this is what's happening in the world. There needs to be that personal connection. And now those questions can plant a seed, right? Asking questions and challenging people's worldview. But telling people like, you got to pay attention to this, you got to pay attention to that is not going to work. So having a food forest and saying, look at all this abundance, look at all this knowledge. How come we weren't taught to grow food? I mean, as simple as that is, who could disagree with feeding the world? Again, some of those basic foundations is what we need, not all this complicated ideology of like this and that and this, because you could even look at the abolitionist time period, right? And I know that you mentioned this when I interviewed you. You said there is value in socialism and communism, and a lot of people don't want to, look at that. But if you read the writers back in the 1800s, you start to sympathize with them and realize where they're coming from and why they said what they said. And not saying that those are good ideologies. I'm saying that voluntarily, these people were looking for solutions outside of the current government. And people will always be creating better solutions, competing with each other. That is the free market. that is freedom. People trying new things. So that's a good thing in many ways. It's when the state takes control of these ideas and says this is the one idea that must be used on everybody where it becomes a problem. And so you had people like Benjamin Tucker who took up the reins after William Lloyd Garrison of the abolitionist movement with his newspaper called Liberty. And he was really bringing together a lot of the figures of that time in his newspaper. Unfortunately, he had to end his operations because everything burned down. But he was going strong.
Isn't that just sad just to think about all the things that were lost in that fire?
Yeah. I mean, now we have technology, right? So I think we have so much potential of what we can do. You just see this constant evolution in humanity toward more individualism, people challenging the state, people challenging the religions. And then you see the foundation to the state being tied with religion in the sense of people saying they have the divine right to rule. But then you also see religion having a lot of anarchist foundations with people like Jesus defying the systems, and then people like the abolitionists who said the government of God is above that of man. And so it's amazing because you can have that inspiring message, you can have that, but then we need to translate that into action. And that's where I think Freedom Cells comes in, Jim Gale's work comes in, and then these other ideas that I'm bringing up, like, for instance, the Liberator 2 showcase, which is like based on the summit. These are just different ways people can start to get involved and get a feel for it, because I don't want consumers. I don't want people just following my content. I want you to be the producer, to produce your own content. And there's a big difference there because, no offense, I can look at InfoWars or Natural News. I know you've called them out in the past, and different independent media that is considered mainstream. Where's their action page? Where are they telling people what to do? Like sharing different ideas of what.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and you point out that just it's so important that we bring people in that way, and I think that overall there is a positive shift happening. For example, I just came back from an event in Atlanta where actually Jim Gale was at, called the Next Steps Conference, and that was in part inspired by some of the things we're doing with the Greater Reset. And then we've talked to other people who, either through my work or somebody else's work, probably your work as well, they finally get the message of like, okay, I could just talk about the problems all day long. And especially if you are sort of like you hinted at earlier, somebody who is just in it for the financial gain, you can milk those clicks and milk the algorithm all day if you want to, and just feed people fear porn and doom porn and civil war and here's what CNN's talking about and all that stuff. And there are definitely people out there making probably a pretty good living doing that. But if you actually genuinely care about trying to help evolve humanity and move us past the problems we're dealing with, and not just kind of watch it. Like lately I've been really harping on this idea that it's not enough to be awake or aware or woke or whatever terms you want to use. That I like the term activated, because it takes you beyond just the sort of awareness stage of like, okay, I'm looking at the world, I see that problems are bad, and I'm watching Mark and I'm watching Cory and I'm watching James and you start to become a consumer of that content. But if those people are just telling you how bad the world is every day, or, and maybe sometimes you're getting useful information, but I meet a lot of people who tell me they go down those rabbit holes and they end up very depressed. They end up feeling like things are hopeless. They end up feeling like, what's the point? And so if you're consuming this kind of content and you're coming away with that feeling, it's probably time to reevaluate who you're giving your attention to. And I'm not saying that to pump up our work necessarily. I'm just saying find somebody who does have solutions that resonate with you, because there are people out there who are totally content to just tell you how bad the world is, and they will tell you how bad the world is until you end up in a FEMA camp. Like, you can watch the world get worse and worse and worse and be like, I'm so enlightened, I'm so aware, I'm so conscious, but what are you doing about it? That's what really matters. It's not enough to just be awake and sort of have all the books on the shelf and have all the documentaries and watch all the podcasts. What are you doing about it? Because there will be another fake pandemic or a staged alien invasion or an economic collapse or whatever sort of cards they want to play, or just the usual, it's 2024, we're in an election year, this is a great time to divide the people, and I expect we will see some craziness later on in this year. We are fully aware that these problems exist and they're coming. So then the onus is put back on us and the listener. What are we actually going to do about it? If you care about your children or your family or your potential future children, or you just care about yourself and you want, to have a nice, thriving life, then perhaps it's time for us to take all that knowledge we've gained and decide, what do we actually do with it? And that's why I was grateful when you reached out to me wanting to talk about these ideas. So I've kind of set the stage now and shared a bit about the
Yes.
things you've already done and the content you've produced, and I will put all those links below so everybody can get plugged into your world. But let's talk about what you're most excited about now, the getting the land, taking inspiration from people like Jim Gale, and how this is really a vital step in moving the movement forward and dragging people, sometimes kicking and screaming, towards solutions. Talk about that
Yeah.
with us.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I haven't seen more potential than what I saw with what Jim Gale's doing as a demonstration, but his team is also creating a blueprint um, for other people to take this around the world. Okay, so that's my goal too. Is as doing this, putting it into action, we will take this, port it, and so that way other people can do the same thing. That's kind of the goal, and that's why a lot of my content, it's like I made a summit and then I made a tutorial how to make a summit. I made a book and then I made a tutorial how to write a book, right? So I'm willing to help anybody out there. It's not just like, oh, I am producing action here, watch me do it. Like I said, anybody can reach out to me if they have any questions. Let me know. Luckily I'm not too big of a content creator, so I can respond to people and I can interact. I can be like, hey, you want to talk about this? Let's try to find out what could you do in your area. And so you can look through the website, you can look through a lot of the different tips and strategies I share. But I'll just mention some big ones that if you want to get involved with, you can reach out to me. For instance, if anybody's a medical practitioner, anybody into medicine, health, particularly psychology, I do have a medical project covering what not a lot of people have really covered, in my view, which is the medical side of statism and looking at how that belief system actually affects people psychologically. I'm working with a bunch of whistleblowers and people. I've worked on it for the past year or two, gathering resources, and we have like hundreds of sources. And we've been working on it nonstop to gather a lot of this material because we see so much potential in it, so we can pose it to the medical community. Having a target market can be effective in this regards because if you can reach one community, that can make a big difference. As you saw in recent years, a lot of people in the medical community have shifted to freedom because they realize, shoot, this is not just looking at an individual's health anymore. We're looking at the world and their freedom. Now they're starting to realize, wait, freedom is actually more important for disease than, pills or even natural medicine. Like freedom is core to everything. If you don't have freedom, you can't do anything. And so people are realizing that. Again, those fundamentals are coming back because we pass them off and we get so complicated and convoluted in what we think we got to do. And you can say it's a very yang-based left brain worldview. So how do you get out of that world? You start showing your compassion. You show that right brain. You show your creative abilities. Like I said, I can't really tell you exactly what to do. Um, you need to find out for yourself, and you need to take that into your own life and your own target market. But I would encourage you to be creative and journal and ask questions because that's what I did, so I can understand what I want to do, right? And what I can do in my own life because everybody's in different environments. I can't say that what I'm doing in Florida is necessarily the same as somewhere up north in the Arctic. I mean, we have double yields, but you can still grow food there. You still can apply the principles of permaculture. Permaculture is working with the natural environment to produce the most amount of yield in the smallest amount of land with the least amount of effort. That's at least the way I like to put it. And so it's definitely a newer modern way of planting and growing food, although you might say that a lot of it is ancient inspired. See, we're just bringing a lot of that knowledge together because we have the internet. So use it to your advantage. If you have a question and you think you should do something, use the internet, use that as your resource. Definitely not having dependence on content creators like us, you mentioned, super big. The showcase I mentioned, people can send a 1 minute clip. The newspaper, somebody can send an article, turn it into a video, or if they need help with their own video production, these are online, right? I also do an X status testimony playlist for people. So if anybody has a testimony, like they want to share, like how did they escape statism? I have a whole list of people where I ask, like, how did you escape this mentality? Because there's compilations online like X vegan, X this, X that, and there was nothing for like X statist, X people who are realizing I was an order follower and I was wrong, like Daniel Arnold, who was 40 plus years in law enforcement, saying, oh, shoot, I was wrong this entire time. I had an ego. I didn't realize it. And so, his words, not mine. You got the quiz AI challenge that we created. That's good for your own internal reflection. That's also online. For networking, I have a networking page where, again, it links to freedom cells, but there's more you can do than just freedom cells. I want to emphasize that. For instance, I have printables, certain papers that you can print that have a bunch of different knowledge on there. And that knowledge can be used to bring in new people, people who are interested in these ideas, and unite people around these different ideas, because that's another thing. How united are we? The abolitionists in the 1800s, I mean, they had anti-slavery societies. They said anti-slavery this, anti-slavery that, anti-slavery that. And I do notice there's a lot of different ideas flowing in independent media, and because there's just so many different problems and so many different layers. So I want to, also as a health coach, as like a practitioner in that mindset, I want to work from where people are, but get to the root cause of the problem. And to me, the root cause is statism. So that does involve mostly just talking to people. Larkin Rose says that's the solution, is just talking it through. And it sounds really silly and cliche, but a lot of people consider to be educators. And this is something I want to emphasize, because there's a lot of people, in mainstream media, using symbolism, using certain ways to get people to do certain things. And there's a reason why Mark Passio teaches people what that symbolism is, and music, and how that influences the mind, because these could be the tools that can help us actually in our efforts with others. So you combine, for instance, the music and the symbolism and the growing food and the online efforts. And what you have now is a integrative system of helping others. And I literally put this in action. I mean, I came to Florida not even a year ago, okay, from Pennsylvania. And the minute I got down here, I started doing events, and I networked, and I used a bunch of websites, including Freedom Cells, including We Are Change chapters, including Make Americans Free Again chapters. I even went to Republican clubs. I'm not afraid. I'm willing to go to different groups that are outside of my echo chamber, outside my boundaries. And because I was willing to do that and simply show my presence and show the material I have, there are people who are interested, who are curious. They don't necessarily agree 100% right away with everything, but it's not, but honestly, they do agree with me, because I'm not like throwing a bunch of things in their face. I'm taking things one step at a time, showing them like, this is what it is. Right. And so recently I talked to Kathy Chamberlain, right? And I consider her more on the right side of things. And she has no problem with a lot of the ideas I'm sharing. She's very new to voluntarism, and she's an author. She's written books, and I think one of them is called like Rules for Deplorables, and it talks about this sort of like plan by the left to do things to the right. But she's super open, super curious about a lot of things we're sharing, because this perspective hasn't been shared with them. So it's important that if you recognize Republicans can be more freedom minded at times, tap into that. And if you see people who on the left are freedom minded at times, tap into that. Where does that hope for freedom come from? And where do they disagree with you? Would they want to use violence to impose their will on you? I doubt it. Right? Most people would agree with voluntarism, at least in our estimation, a lot of the people in this community, if they just knew about it. But because they don't know about it, it becomes very difficult. And they have a lot of justifications and superstitions. So there is a lot of mental work to get through. Again, this is moral suasion. All right. So moral suasion is that action that the abolitionists did. And that's that action that Larkin Rose and Mark Passio are promoting the most. Okay. This is why Mark Passio also has a course on how to produce content. So if anybody wants to really get deep into that, he has a course with that as well. I do think if we had a mass printing campaign, for instance, with the newspaper that I have, or even Nita.one, a website that I run, it's a movement for nature is the answer, a simple message going out across the world. Simple things like that can make a difference in regards to getting the message out. Okay. Not an identity type of thing, like this is a group, this is who I am part of, but the message, the education, that's what matters. So again, anti-slavery societies, you had one in every single state. Lysander Spooner came up with a plan saying we need to have different societies like in every single state. And if everybody had their own committee in each state, then we can all act more so united in a similar way. Right. So this is just something to bear in mind, because I'm all a fan of decentralized solutions, but there is an extent to which we need to be unified on what needs to end. For instance, when the founding fathers came together and they said we need to rebel against the British, a lot of them were like, well, could we end slavery too? And they're like, well, I don't know if we can handle two at once. And the same thing with the abolitionists. It's like, I want to end slavery, but women also don't have a lot of rights either. And the women are like, this is kind of unfair. Like after the Civil War, they put the word man in the Constitution, and they recognized the rights of Negroes, but they didn't recognize the rights of women. And so it was like, it felt unfair to them. That's why you had the civil rights era that happened afterwards. So see, humanity is just recognizing who they're meant to be and what they're supposed to do. The Do Not Vote campaign. I'll be promoting this during election time. You say it's election season. I have a certain strategy, as I mentioned, where people can print signs instead of political signs, universal and timeless signs that say never vote. Yes, it's meant to spark a reaction. It's meant to cause a little bit of controversy because to some extent, sacrifice is necessary for freedom. If you look at any spiritual teacher, anybody in the past who created a lot of change, sacrifice was required. Um, there were people like Henry David Thoreau, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and the Transcendentalists who were abolitionists who were willingly going to jail for their beliefs, willingly did not pay their taxes. Now, I'm not saying that's what you should do right away, but I think there needs to be a time where humanity just says no, and not necessarily using paperwork to get around that and to say no in a unique or special way. Right. Because a lot of people are like, well, if I sign my paperwork a certain way, if I do the special procedure, I can say no. If we pass a law and we change this person office, we can say no. But what about just saying no? Because if you cannot say no for yourself with your own conscience, you will forever be a slave in this system of political slavery. That's just the frank reality of it. Mark Passio calls no the lost word in Freemasonry, tying in occultism and these ideas that the elites keep away from us because knowledge is power. And so that's why if you want to give people power, you want to bring freedom to them, knowledge is everything. And that's why, Derrick Broze and others in independent media created people like me unintentionally, just by putting out the work. They didn't know there were people like me behind the scenes researching since I was 13 years old, finding their material, right? But it's simply because they put it out there. And like one video, one thing can make the world's difference for that individual. And they don't realize it, but I'm a testimony for that being the case.
I appreciate you sharing that, brother. And I want to just hit it. You said a lot of good things there, and I hope everybody's catching this. And of course, we will include the links to your website so people can dive in further. But you said we were talking earlier about the importance of talking to neighbors and just building local community. But the other thing you said that I cannot emphasize enough too is to talk to people that have different opinions than you. And it doesn't seem like the internet has not helped that very much. People are we're in our echo chambers, we're in our little bubbles, and then I think it unfortunately feeds into a sort of a physical reality where people are living their lives increasing like that and thinking like, oh, there's nothing I can gain or learn or even share with to somebody who has a different political persuasion. Even I would say amongst us who are voluntarists, and I've been guilty of this in the past, I'll say, and something that I've had to learn to kind of evolve through, which is like, oh, they're a statist. Fuck them. There's no reason to help them. They're lost. They're sheeple. They're just all these sort of ways that they do create an other, and not in a healthy way. We each need to have our principles, and there's lines in the sands. Like there should be people you're willing to say, I'm not going to work with that person because this or that. But if we don't even make an effort to try to meet people where they are, then we shouldn't expect our movements to grow. And again, we're just going to stay in these little echo chambers. And for me, and I think you share the same goal, I do imagine and work towards and pray for a future where humanity is completely and totally liberated, at least those who choose that, because as you hinted at earlier, we can't force people to be free. People have to come to that own conclusion themselves and take the necessary steps. But if we don't even make an effort to speak to people that have different beliefs. I know that's scary for some people to imagine having a conversation with somebody who doesn't agree with everything you say, which is of course not even realistic. Nobody agrees on everything, and that's okay. I like to remind people that for me, the sort of movement that I want to be a part of and the movement that I'm building and participating in and the future that I'm creating isn't a future where we're all zombies and just repeat each other and sound the same and agree on every single thing about every single aspect of life. Like that wouldn't be fun, or that's not realistic. And so we need to get past maybe some egos and some fears and learn that there's actually some growth that can happen. Like for example, you mentioned like Patrick running for not governor, and I did run for mayor of Houston 2 times with a very similar goal. I took a different tact because in my opinion, sort of coming out so strong like that, you're not even going to get taken seriously by a lot of people. Like it has a sort of like, okay, I'm not governor, or I'm calling myself taxation is theft. Like I get that sort of more like mocking the system in that way. But from my perspective, I wanted to be able to go into neighborhoods and talk to people who aren't going to watch this program, who have no idea what Odyssey is or Rockfin, and they probably never heard the word voluntarism. They're not going to come to the Greater Reset because it's just not even a part of the reality. These are the kind of people that are involved in local politics because they want to make sure their trash gets picked up, right? And how do you craft our voluntarist message to reach that person without just yelling, fuck the government, taxation is theft? Like they're not even going to listen to you. You're just not even going to get anywhere. So I very strategically had to learn, like, not only to be mature enough to go into circles where I know these people probably buy into 95% of the propaganda that I'm working against. They're probably vaccinated. They probably buy into climate scam, but they care enough to get involved in their local community. And honestly, I kind of came to a place where I felt like I almost would rather work with somebody who gives a shit enough to get involved in their local community, even if they are a statist, as opposed to some voluntarist who's like, I'm so high and mighty and I just sit on my computer all day, because at least that person is making the effort to get involved locally. It doesn't mean they have the right ideas or the right principles, but I'm more likely to be able to impact them, influence them, learn from them even, and teach them if we actually collaborate together. Whereas somebody who's just like, oh, everything's so screwed, or I'm so enlightened, I'm just going to stay in my computer all day, they're not going to influence their local community. They might influence some people online, but again, to emphasize the importance of that local action. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of share that I think really can't be emphasized enough, that whatever you're doing.
You've traveled everywhere. So I mean, I want to emphasize, like, you're somebody who's met a lot of people. You've talked to people in person about their ideas. So you have good experience on your hand to talk about this. I'm just saying, because again, some people don't even take the beginner steps to do that. And when I was down here in Florida, the first event we did, out the door, like, I had a local business. I talked to this lady. It was all like a homemade store, right? Like homemade products in Tarpon Springs, Florida. And super cool. I asked, like, hey, can we do an event here? She's like, yeah, let's do it. Right. And so she provided free advertising for the event, but every customer that walked in that door, and she had a very loyal, like, fan base of people who wanted, like, those products. And so there you go. Already I have advertising. In addition, I was reaching out, networking, using Freedom Cells, using all of my online tools, using real life. And so the first event we had was just crazy busy. And then I used Facebook groups, we used all these different methods. And it's like, why aren't people doing this everywhere?
If you had chosen to say, you know what, this lady's a statist, or we don't agree on everything, I can't work with her, never mind, like, then you wouldn't even been able to do what you're doing. And that's kind of my point, is that, like, we don't have to throw away our principles, but setting them aside for a moment to at least talk to a human being can be valuable. And yeah, like you said, it doesn't even come into your mind, because when you get involved locally, I think some of those things that we get hung up on, they disappear. It doesn't mean that there's not a place once you get to know this person to say, hey, have you ever thought about, how this system works? And, you get into the deeper nuances of things. But at the beginning, it's just like, I want to get involved in my local community. This person has a space, or they have a business, or they have a product, and I'm going to host a local farmers market, or we're going to do a meetup, or whatever it may be. And you're bringing people together, and people see that benefit of that. They, especially for people like us, they might look at us and they might say, like, who is this long-haired, whatever assumptions they make, that does happen. But then they like, oh, wow, this guy actually has a brain, and he cares about local community, and he's getting involved, and he's proactive. Like, I want to work with him again. That shows so much more character than just kind of being high and mighty and talking down to people about, like, how they're just idiot statists or whatever. And at least in my view, we're not really likely to advance our goals if we can't work with people where they're at. That doesn't mean that we don't have the maybe longer term, bigger goal of, like, trying to show them the error of their thinking. But if we can work with them where they're at, and then through that influence them, and maybe just as you're working with them, one day it comes up and you're like, hey, can I tell you more about the philosophy I believe in? And before you know it, they're like, wow, that makes total sense. I never thought about that. I'm going to stop paying taxes or whatever. But you're not going to get to that point if you just judge people off the bat, if you don't get out from behind the computer, and if you're not able to really just focus on, like, we need community, we need it to be as local as possible. And if everybody's doing what you're doing in your community, trying to organize events, trying to get land and focus on that, then we'll be a lot better off. We will be a lot better off, instead of just watching the world get worse. So I want to give you some more time to...
Yeah, the Corbett report. I mean, he's got, like, a whole page of solutions, right, of different things. And so if you can integrate a lot of those solutions together, I think you have something really cool for yourself. I have somebody come to one of our events, and I meet a lot of cool people just because I have these events. They come there, right? Like I'm inviting people with different mindsets and people who want to question things. So like I don't even have to look for them. They look for me. They come to me. And that's the thing. That this is a sign of success, at least from my view of doing this, is that they will ask you about your own philosophy. You don't have to bring it up to them. They'll be curious asking you, like, I want to learn more. I want to do this. Right?
Exactly.
That's a sign of success.
Because they're getting to know you as a person, and then that becomes like, okay, I want to know more about this person, right? But you're not just coming in like beating them over the head with the philosophy and like, why aren't you paying attention to this? You're meeting them as a human first, is the way I would put it. You're meeting them as a human first, and those ideas, it doesn't mean they lose value or that you're abandoning your principles, but you're meeting the human where they are, and then you're seeing how you can collaborate. And I will say like that whenever I'm not as involved in Houston as I used to be because I only live here part-time now, but we're building similar kind of Freedom Cell community in Mexico. But for the 7 years that I was involved with the Houston Freethinkers, and we were hosting documentary screenings and community garden meetups and benefit shows for this cause or that cause and art shows, and every now and then a protest or a march or a rally. But more and more, it was all about bringing people together. We would say, hey guys, we're going to have a community garden day. There's going to be some music. We're going to cook some pizza. Come hang out. And you would just get all this community come out, and we'd kick ass, and we'd plant all these, seeds. And then, it just, through that, community develops. And I don't necessarily need to know that everybody there is an anarchist to work with them. But with time, you start to get to know each other, and you do build that community. And so, yeah, this is
saying like, wait, I got to add more actions into this. So like when I gather people together, not just gathering them for the events, I need to leave them with something to do at the end of that event. So like, as you do it, you apply more different strategies as you learn how to talk with people and all that. So like it all comes naturally. Like if you have too many questions and you're overthinking this, anybody who's viewing this, I say just do it. Kind of like that idea.
Just get started. Just get started. Yeah. That's the whole thing. So let's talk for a moment as we get close to wrapping up here more about the land, because I know this is going to be a bigger project, and like you said, you're kind of imagining there's going to be quite a bit of money to raise and stuff. But where are you at with this project? Is it still early stages? If somebody's hearing this and they're like, hey, I'm in Florida, I love this guy's attitude, I want to get involved, how can they contact you, or what are you looking for at the moment in terms of the land?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. So around the Tampa area, which is about central West Coast Florida. Okay, so Jim Gale is about central Florida, more east. He's about 3 hours from where I am. But where we are in this area, things are very pricey. I mean, there's a lot of people moving to Florida, but people are very active. I mean, when I was in Pennsylvania, I was able to find people, even though I was in the woods, I was in the middle of nowhere. I was still able to connect with Freedom Minds because of all the resources that I use, which, by the way, I'm very transparent with. I have it on the site, like all the resources that I use to create the events, including Freedom Cells. But see, with this Florida area, it's a lot of developers coming in, taking over farmland. They're not even supposed to. I mean, a lot of the farmers are upset. They're doing backhand deals with the government, typical. And, they're taking a lot of land. And it's like all I'm asking for is a tiny little bit to be a demonstration site. Now, my backyard's already kind of a demonstration. I'm growing food, but don't have a lot of land compared to when I was up north. But like I said, people down here are more active. And so I think we got to use that to our advantage because certain areas are going to be more prone to change than other areas. As you saw, like in the Civil War, there was the North and the South. And of course, the government used that for their greater agendas. But and we can be aware of that, like sort of co-opting. But when it comes to growing food and be self-sufficient, there's not really much co-opting to be done. Although the governments will do whatever they want. I mean, this is why we have conspiracy theorists among us, because they'll always ask the questions and get curious. And I love that, But anybody in the Tampa area, whether you talk about flat earth or whether you're conservative or whatever, I welcome you. I welcome you to come to any of our events, come together. Let's talk about freedom. Let's talk about these ideas. Anyone. And even if you don't have money, if you want to offer your labor for these projects, that's cool. I just want people to know about it. Okay. Even if you're from a different state and you're thinking about moving here, there's a lot of people like that too. We found a 5-acre property for $500,000. So that's the type of prices we're working with, right? You go up north, it's way cheaper than that. Even just 1 hour north of here, it's cheaper than that. So what I'm trying to create here is possibly the impossible, because there would be nobody with a food force demonstration site like that here in this area. At least from my knowledge, there isn't anybody who's done that. So that's why I'm trying to do it here. But if I can't, I do have a 5-year plan. I might go a little bit more up north and do it where there is more rural areas, if that's not also super developed by then. But also prices might change and the collapse might happen. And there's a lot of questions in the air. So it's just about, I'm already prepared in my own life. I don't need to do this project. I don't need to do this demonstrative project, but I'm doing it because it's a sacrifice, on my terms, to bring to the world, like, this is an education site. This is what Jim Gale's doing. Like, he has an event place where people can come. They have Airbnbs. They can stay. So it's agritourism, some people will call it. If you hear my bird screaming in the background, it's a bird. But that's basically what the site is. It's meant to be a place where education and events and basically a gold mine. We're going to be growing food, doing mushroom farms and all that. So that way we can launch other projects from there. There are neighborhoods being built in Florida with Jim Gale's team where they're building certain lots and they have permaculture around those lots and they have community centers. This is all being built out. I know people in Volusia County with $11 million projects with thousands of acres where they plan to build, like, quite literally a whole civilization off grid and everything. And nobody really knows about these projects because some of them are still being planned, but they are happening pretty rapidly because this stuff is just exploding in popularity and a lot of people want it.
And there's a lot going on in Florida, it seems like. I've noticed, like, I mean, like I said, I was just at the Next Steps conference this weekend, and I think half the people, that was in Atlanta, and half the people there were coming from Florida and also thinking about these ideas, talking about land, talking about this. So I think you're in the right spot for it, for that kind of activity.
And just, I want to let you know, like, anybody in independent media, they could do this probably in a couple of days. It's going to take me much longer because I don't have the outreach that some of these other people have, which I'm just being honest, like Natural News and InfoWars. If they wanted to do some of these projects that you and I have set up or others, like, I mean, they could do it so much faster than us. I'm surprised they don't do it. I think there is some accountability as an extra action step on part of anybody who's listening to this to say, hey, where is that action page on your website? Where are your rallies or your acts of civil disobedience? You know, where are you building the towns and showing by example? I don't see it in a lot of independent media. And I think that's part of the problem. Now, I have to give them credit. They were, like, again, forerunners to you and I and the things we do. Sure. But it's just, and we can complain all we want, but we can show, like, what to do. And that's, I think, ideal.
I think that's an important point, though, man. Like, I mean, yeah, give credit where credit's due to people who kind of helped wake us up in the early years or whatever. But I mean, I think, at least for me personally, like, I quickly outgrew some of those different channels you mentioned, and others as well. And not in the sense of, like, oh, I'm better than you, but just realizing, like, okay, I've heard this 1,000 times. You're gonna tell me, you know, and it's like you said, eventually you get to a point where you're like, okay, but what am I gonna do about it? And yeah, I'm in the same way. Like, I mean, if I had the network that Jones has, or even any of these other people, and then you just even imagine, like for example, back in the day, Alex Jones used to do this thing where every day on the show he would say, everybody, at noon p.m., 12 p.m., we're all going to go to Google and we're going to search 9/11's an inside job. And they would just freaking blow up the internet. And you could see Google Analytics becoming, like, 9/11 being an inside job would be like a trending term. And then all of a sudden it would disappear. Google would take it down or whatever. Like, that's just one simple way of measuring your impact. Now, what if you like literally got your millions of followers, and then even if you got just 10% of them to actually do it and said, hey, like, let's go all buy some seeds today and plant a tree, or just something, you know, like something that would actually be productive where you could measure the impact. I think about that a lot, and that is definitely something. Change overnight. I agree. Like, that's something that I think I keep in mind, that as my work grows, and I definitely have ambitions to reach millions of people for that reason, for that, like, you know, what kind of power is there behind that? Not for, like, my own ego, but just to see, like, wow, if you can activate that many people, you know, and really push that, then it will just be, the impacts will be immeasurable, and even beyond what you can see in the physical moment. But for years down the line, it would ripple out. And I think that's valuable and it's important. But hopefully people like yourself and myself, we can drag more people, some of them kicking and screaming towards the solutions, because I do think that is, at this point, all that matters. I mean, I still, like, consider myself a journalist. I try to balance the journalism and the deep dives with the solutions, doing public speaking and, you know, focusing on the philosophy, because I think they both have a role. But absolutely, like, if you're listening to this, which I imagine most of the audience, you know Agenda 2030, you know the Great Reset, you know about these problems we're facing. It's March 2024. What are we waiting for? You know, it's really just, it's up to us and those of us who have eyes and ears to see and hear to take these steps, to lead by example, and to pull everybody and anybody we can. So I really appreciate that that is the direction you're going in, man, and that you're taking your content. I also I want to just show the website again. I value, and I can see your mind and your heart in this, how you organize the website and try to make it very accessible and palatable to everybody and broken down by simple to understand categories. So I will include all the links that we covered today, and also I'll put your page. You've got some events coming up and that you're highlighting, including some of the ones you've already mentioned, and the Liberator too, and then you had a note there for the Greater Reset, thank you, and I know Jim Gale's got some more stuff coming up. So you're keeping busy, and I appreciate that. I'm thankful for that, thankful to know that you're out here, man. Any final closing thoughts you'd like to share with everybody?
Well, I shared a lot of different strategies, and I encourage, if it's overwhelming for anybody, or even if it's underwhelming, think about it in your own life, what you can do, right? Because if you're expecting someone else to tell you what to do, I think that's part of the problem. Because if you see we're not doing something, then you show us, do it better. And then if we're open to it, because it seems like, no offense, but the voluntarists are some of the most open people I've met, like who are like open to new ideas, who are trying to learn new things. Like Jim Gale, he's not hard to get a hold of. Like I talk to him, he's always open, trying to see how we can work together. These are people who care about humanity. They're not in it for the money. They're in it for something much greater than that. And so it's just something to know that if you do see a better solution, I'm open to it. And a lot of us are open to it. And at least, pitch it to us. I'm open to it. And if anybody has land in Tampa, or if anybody has any resources or connections, I'm totally open to meeting anybody. As I said, I'll do what I can in my own life, my own area. And I encourage you to do the same. Thank you so much, Derrick.
Awesome, brother. I appreciate you taking the time. Everybody, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Be sure to check the show notes for all the links to get into Cory's world and find out about the great work he's doing and more events he's got coming up. And if you are in Florida, I don't know what you're waiting for, but you got somebody like him, you got Jim Gale. The opportunities are there. When you're ready, step up. And even if you're not in Florida, you can take his example and take his inspiration, and you can do it where you're at, because we need freedom everywhere if we're going to thrive through the many dark things that we know humanity is facing. So thank you guys for listening. As always, remember, you are powerful, you are beautiful, and you are free. Talk to you soon.
Since 2012, the Conscious Resistance Network has been an independent media organization focused on empowering individuals through education, philosophy, health, and community organizing. We work to create a world where corporate and state power do not rule over the lives of free human beings. Our motto is leading by example and helping others in their pursuit of freedom. Visit theconsciousresistance.com to find our articles, documentaries, interviews, podcasts, books, and more. Remember, you are powerful, you are beautiful, and you are free.